Welcome to episode 10 of the Welcome Home podcast, where we talk about the transformation from troops and boots to veterans in the civilian world. I'm Andy Weins, and as always, I'm joined by my good buddy, Dylan Sessler. Dylan, what do you want to talk about today?
Sounds like we're going to talk about entrepreneurship and starting businesses with veterans.
I like it. So we're both business owners. I've been a business owner in some capacity since 2009, all the way from I had a business card and I couldn't spell LLC to today, where I have had several businesses. I've been part of a franchise. I've had businesses in multiple states. And to you've been a solopreneur for a number of years. Is that correct?
I'm a rookie, 3 years right now.
So when was the last time you had a job, like a job?
I mean, you could technically say I still kind of have a job because I work for a firearms store or range, I should say. And I still instruct there. So,
but not so fine, full-time job. When was the last time you had a full-time job? Yeah,
a long time ago.
3 years ago or longer?
Probably 6. Yeah.
What were you doing in between there?
Grad school basically, and then Afghanistan. So last time I had a full-time job was before all that. So probably before 2016.
Okay, and so we're 2023. Carry the one. All right, and then so when did you start your business?
I started mine March 4th, 2020. It
was a great time.
So, yeah, like a week before everything changed.
Went to shit.
Yep.
You're not right. I was in Vegas March 11th. I'm sitting there in Vegas, at the airport, when they announced the NCAA tournament was being canceled.
It's crazy.
And the NBA was being whatever it was, which was interesting. As I'm sitting there in Vegas, I was most frustrated because the next week I had a bunch of concert tickets to see Gaelic Storm. And then I didn't get to see them till 2022. I will say, I've never seen so many people wash their hands in an airport bathroom in my entire life. Like they ran out of soap, they ran out of paper towel, they were about to run out of water at the airport from all the people. And that was, there was like some people wearing masks, but it wasn't a thing anyway. So, all right, yeah. So that we don't need to talk about COVID. I'm sure there's plenty of coverage. Just Google it. I'm sure you can find plenty of very accurate information when it comes to COVID. So entrepreneurship, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about entrepreneurship in particular, and we talked about it right before the show here, is because a lot of veterans want to be entrepreneurs. I'm gonna look up the stat. I think it's like, because I taught Boots for Business pre-pandemic a few times. It's like if you're a veteran, you're 3 times more likely to open a business than non-veterans, and there's a lot of veterans that, especially when they're getting out, I know they get pitched franchise ideas, and I've seen that go real south real quick.
Yeah. So according to the Census Bureau, 2 million businesses are owned by veterans, which employ 5 million Americans.
There you go.
So pretty significant amount of, I would say, a very significant amount of business owners, not necessarily holding up, America in terms of employees, though.
5 million ain't bad. I mean, there's more people that work for small businesses than they are for big businesses, right? The big businesses get all the publicity, but there's a lot of veteran-owned businesses that make small businesses in general that make the world go round, and veteran-owned businesses in particular.
Yeah, I feel like the mentality that comes from the military very much lends itself to entrepreneurship, or at least I would say, and this leans into the data, but it leans into solopreneurship.
Okay. Oh, here we go. So, despite veterans being 45% more likely to start a business than non-veterans, right? 45%. Veteran-owned businesses only account for 5.9% of the total businesses in America. Which, there you go. So, there's a higher desire. Mm-hmm. This is actually a recent article. This is Forbes magazine in 2023. So this is something we see every year. There's a higher desire for veterans to start businesses, and yet a lack of execution.
Yeah.
So 10%, according to a new study in 2001, 10% of new business owners were veterans. 10.7%. 2019, 5.4%. So almost doubled the percent. We already know that a number of people got into business post COVID for a myriad of reasons. But here,
Yeah.
from this gusto.com, right? So basically, doubled the number of businesses percentage wise by veterans 2001, 2000, as you were, as I was, Jesus, 2021 versus 2019. Or that 5.9 was back in 2018, so that was dated material there from Forbes. Thank you.
Sure.
Um. Anyhow, so there's a stat. So okay, so let's talk about this. Why did you get into business for yourself? What did that look like? What was that journey all about?
Well, so I deployed to Afghanistan in 2019, and prior to that, I had actually supported a friend of mine in building his photography and videography business,
Mm-hmm.
where he kind of worked in the gun industry. So I had a lot of experience there as to know how to work a camera. So I learned how to do that. But I watched him build this, and in a lot of ways, I kind of helped him mentally and emotionally kind of build this business that he had, kind of built the framework for, in terms of being a social media influencer. He was pretty big on YouTube, but he had never really monetized it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I walked him through. I was kind of the vision of like, hey, if you start here and then go here, well, you could go crazy, right? And by the time in 1 year, I think we started in like January of 2018, and by November, he was working with some of the biggest names in the optics industry, in the long range industry, and then by the next year, he was running like $200,000 in a year,
Hmm.
and all from like me and him just literally going to a couple shows and talking to people. And so like when I first kind of dabbled in that was when I was like kind of realizing my own potential of my ability to sell things and negotiate and deliver results that were not there if no one did anything.
Yeah.
So when I came home, um, I wanted to do it for myself. I wanted to separate from him and focus on what I wanted to do. And it just so happens that like my book was kind of becoming a more of a reality after coming home from deployment and seeing the need for what my book has to offer, the mental health space. So I started the framework, and I just built the idea within myself and said, you know what, I'm gonna fill this space, this void that I see in an industry, and where I am, I think is I'm not I'm not a counselor, I'm not a mental health professional, not a certificate bearing professional. I'm a mental health coach, uh, and very specifically because there's this gap between people that don't want any help,
Mm-hmm.
and people that do want help but won't go to a therapist. There's a gap there.
Yep.
And there's a whole niche of people that refuse to go to professional help because of whether it was stigma or whether it was bad experience. Because I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who have had trauma because of uh, mental health professionals or mental health institutions. And so I saw that gap in writing my book and building my social media and talking to people. And eventually, I just created this business that fit that perfectly. And now I coach people on a pretty much on a daily basis. I run my podcast, I run my social media, and I help people in a place where not a lot of people help people, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that absolutely hits the nail on the head. So you had the when did the book come out? Did the book come out before or after you started the business?
After, so I started writing the book.
Yep.
I honestly, I was I had no idea what I was doing. If I'm being completely honest, like I started my business not knowing why I was starting my business. Right? I made the LLC, and I made the most innocuous name that didn't have any connection to anything. It was Invictus
Yeah.
Development Group. Right? Like
Yeah.
somebody looks at that and you'd be like, "What do you do?" Right? Like,
Yeah. I
and the
still have no
reality
idea
is
what. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And the reality is like I made it that way because I had no idea what I was gonna do. And
Okay.
then what I did was I started on social media talking about what I wanted my book to really centralize on. And that's when everything kind of started narrowing my focus. I was forced to start having conversations with people that actually needed my what I was offering. And then at the same time, like I could still have that kind of diversity of what my business can actually offer, because I do firearms instruction as well as mental health work. So it's really interesting of what my business has to offer. It's really a solopreneur only kind of
Yep.
operation. At some point, I might separate those and do my own thing in a different capacity, mostly for insurance and legal reasons. But realistically, it's been 3 years of I'm learning everything I need to know, and it's taken a long time to get here, but it's been wonderful.
And does your wife work?
Yeah, she works for a hospital and a yeah, children's
Okay.
hospital.
Okay, because that's one of the other challenges I've seen. My background's in the junk removal space, and one of the challenges I've seen with a lot of veterans that come out is they come out, they buy into a franchise, they move back to their home of record or new home, right? So they're new in the community, and their significant other or spouse doesn't have consistent income, and so they take all this money that they've saved up and or retirement and or pension, whatever, and they put it towards a business, and they don't have a stable source of income, so then they're making a lot of decisions
Yeah.
on that are because they have to eat.
Hmm.
They're and when you and right when you have desperation, it limits your field of vision, and it limits your options. And there's a lot of people that start businesses out of necessity or start businesses because a catastrophic thing happened, and they're wildly successful. There's also a lot of businesses that crumble and burn before they even get off the ground,
Yeah.
and you don't hear about those, right? You hear about the ones where it's like, oh yeah, I was down to my last penny, and it's like, okay, um, that can be somewhat problematic.
Right.
So that's why it's interesting, because with you especially, I've seen a lot of coaches and consultants that they come in and it's a side hustle, or they have a full time job, or in your case, you wrote a book to complement
Yeah.
what you're doing. And you've also had a huge customer acquisition by releasing content in your podcast, and you're already doing the thing, and then you have some people that pay you to do the thing,
Yeah.
and that's essentially what you're doing.
It started off as a side hustle, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the book was really the main focus, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to write this book, and that'll be centralized around my business and speaking. So my
Yep.
goal was actually speaking, and I've done that. But what happened was, because of TikTok, because I jumped on TikTok, and within the first year, I think I had probably 300,000 followers within the
Mm-hmm.
first year. And by the time you get to that point, you get a lot of realizations about both yourself and who your customer is, and who your for me, clients are. Um, I had to face what my clients wanted, and what my clients wanted wasn't necessarily just my book or me to go speaking, but they wanted to talk one on one with me. And so, like, the idea of actually coaching people actually came from my followers on TikToks asking me the question of, do you offer one-on-one sessions? Do you offer coaching? Because what I was saying to them was just hitting. And I like that was never even a thought until it was given to me. And so, like, I look back at my, like, if I were to start a business again, I wouldn't have done it the way I had done it. I would have clarified a lot more before I got there.
Yep.
But at the same time, maybe that's what I needed, right? Like, if you start a business at $150 in Wisconsin, like, you're only at $150 if it doesn't work that much. But there's other businesses that if you invest so much and you have no idea what you're really stepping into,
Yep.
That's where it really pays off to have a very clean and clear understanding of what you're actually trying to accomplish, and you don't just jump into it like I did.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. So, and I like that you brought that up. I teach entrepreneur classes based around the 6 buckets of business, and I tell them, in order to have a business, right, the first bucket is marketing, and you have to answer 3 questions before you can say I have a business. Yeah. And having an LLC, paying your $130 with the state of Wisconsin doesn't count. That's not a business. That's a name, right? Yep. And so the 3 things you need to have with a business are you have to have a brand, right? So you have to have a name of a thing, right? Even if like you said, your brand was Invictus, right? And it's like, well, what does that mean? I don't know, right? So it's like, well, you have one, right? I didn't say it was right, but you have a brand, right? That's the brand.
And the brand doesn't even need to be the business name. Like nobody knows the name of my business. No, they only know me.
Correct. Well, then correct, and then you're the face of the brand, right? And you're the right. Okay, got it. Well, that's the brand, right? The brand is I'm gonna get this, Army National Guard soldier that talks softly and understands shit and has been through shit and wrote a book and he's going to listen to me, right? Like, got it. That's the guy's the brand, right? And the name is insignificant. I mean, there are brands out there where it's a symbol. It's like, oh, I know what that company is, and you don't know what the business is necessarily, how they got the name behind the business,
Yep.
Second thing you need a well-defined product or service, and that sounds really simple. Like, well, I do counseling. Well, cool. What separates you from the 900 other counselors that I can call within a 30-mile radius?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Cool. You ought to answer that question, and you have to make it very obvious to your client. And then, right, not only what separates you, how do you charge? How do you get paid? Who pays you?
Right.
So there's counselors, right, consultants, or like you said, right? I'm not a coach, or I'm not a counselor. I'm not a therapist, right? Because those words matter, and you need a piece of paper for some of those words. Yep. Anybody can be a consultant. Anybody can be a coach. I tell people all the time, I'm an environmental consultant. And they say, what does that mean? Well, that means I understand where things go when they go, when you put them on the curb, I understand where they go. And I don't have to be the smartest person when it comes to environmental consulting. I only have to be smarter than the person I'm talking to, which often, if you've never thought of what happens to the stuff when I put it on the curb, I know more than you, right? So there you go. I'm a consultant. Yeah. And I do consulting. 7 years ago when I started Green Up Solutions, similar to you, what does it mean? Who knows? I have a little more depth there, but we don't advertise it, right? But Green Up Solutions, environmental consulting, people that pay me for my perspective. They weren't like, hey, Andy, let me give you money so you can tell me what you know about the environment. They're like, hey, I have this problem. Can you solve it, right? And I had to do that, right? So then the third thing you need is you need a customer. Yeah. Who is going to buy the product or service? Because there are plenty of people that are like, I have a great brand. I have a great product. Cool. Who's interested? Who's going to buy it? Why are they going to buy it? What problem are you solving? That all falls into the, 3 questions of, do you have a business? And that's where people struggle, because within the questions, there's 100 other questions that you will need to answer in due time. Now, in your case, you didn't have all those answers. You had the first 3, right? You had a basic understanding, and you even described now, right? Who are your customers? People that interacted with your content that wanted more. What was the product? I guess I sell consulting by the hour, right? What is your brand? Me on TikTok.
Yep.
Follow me here, right? And it's like, oh, okay.
Yep. It all revealed itself to me.
Absolutely. And so this is why, like you said, you would have done it different. I don't necessarily. I've run businesses where I had a mission and vision statement very clearly defined day one, and they failed because we thought we knew more than we did, right? And we didn't ask the customers. We didn't understand really what were we really fulfilling a need. Yeah. So I had a business doing media or videography, let's call it, because there's whole media packages, but really videography. People saw my videos on LinkedIn. They're like, oh, I love what you're doing. I want to hire the same people that do yours. I'm like, well, our team is internal. So enough people told us they wanted to hire us, so we built a business around it. Turns out they didn't want to hire us because they didn't want to hire us at the price point that I needed to charge them to make it worth my while to have a business. So they wanted the result I got with paying less than what I was paying, and I paid for it in-house and took all the risk and yada, yada. So you can have all those things and you can still fail. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the challenges I've seen when I've coached Boots to Business. People will write a business plan and it's like, okay, you're going to talk about a lot of these things and what you want to solve and how you're going to do it and what you're going to do. But it's like, well, what's the brand? What is the actual product or service? You have to be very clear. How do people buy this thing from you? And who needs this? And if the answer is everybody, you got to narrow it down.
Right.
And if you say veterans, well, which veterans? Narrow it down. Or in that case, there's a lot of businesses. It's like, well, you can't, how I say this. If you only sell the veterans on your particular product or service, you have a very finite amount of people that can buy your product or service, right? You need to be niched down as much as your industry is. And the only way you're going to know that is by getting out there and testing the theories, surveying people, going out there in a side hustle. I love people that are like, hey, I got a side hustle, right? I have very low cost of entry, and I started testing the theory. So like with junk removal, people are like, I want to get into junk removal. What do I do? I'm like, go do 100 jobs. Well, where do I get them? That's part of the journey.
Right. Like that's honestly, I think if there's like advice that I would give to anyone kind of stepping into thinking about building business, I really love the idea of you should step on social media and determine if you can actually find people that want to listen to you. Because if you can find people that want to listen to you, then you can find people that want to buy from you. Like that was the simplest kind of advice that I ever kind of formulated for myself, is that if you can find people that will listen to you, you can find people that will pay for what you sell. And some of the people that have bought from me really didn't even want to use me. They just wanted to give me money because of what I've done for them. And that's the
already done
really remarkable thing for me.
Well, here's what you did. You put yourself out there first. You didn't have a perfectly defined pay, price structure, or these are the services I offer. You started by saying, do people even want what I have?
Right.
Even if they don't want it for free, chances are they're not willing to pay for it.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? 300,000 followers in the first, year, right? Hillbilly math says it's 1,000 people a day expressed some level of interest in something you might have in the future. That's a pretty good top of funnel.
Yep.
And then from there, you figure out, okay, 300,000 people aren't going to buy from you, and some will.
Yeah.
So how do we figure out who those people are and what number and at what price is it worth it, right? Because you could probably get 10,000 people that'll pay you $10 an hour. Well, that's not gonna, right? That's too many hours and not enough dollars.
Right.
So what's that sweet spot, right? Is it a customer load of 300 or 30 customers, in some level of subscription model, right? Weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever, on call, right? At $250 an hour, it's like, okay, well, now I have something. And then you do the math and you figure out how do people find you, and you rinse and repeat and you define it along the way. And that's, for you as a solopreneur, it worked out because you had a wife that could pay the bills, right? And you didn't have to go out there. You didn't have to create a business to support, right? You had the runway from money saved up, deployments, whatever, right? You had the runway to figure it out as the as the plane started taking off.
Right.
And you could, course correct.
Yeah, there was a lot of kind of safety structures in place for me. And me and my wife had talked about that. It was like, I want to write this book. Obviously COVID came, and it was such remarkable timing, because once COVID hit, I had 3 months of I couldn't work, right? Because what we do is face to face. We're basically shut down for I think it was like 2 months. We were like the firearms range that I was working at the time was shut down. Like we couldn't sell guns. We couldn't have more than 10 people in the store at a time. So we only needed like 2 cashiers. So I was basically not working, and I was right after my deployment. So I was fine with that, but it gave me time to just write a book and then build a strategy of like, what do I want to talk about on TikTok? And so that's what I did. Realistically, I had so much time. I had so much kind of pre-built in my mind through my deployment of, this is how I want to structure my direction, right? I want to write the book. I want to speak publicly. I want to build a podcast. I want to build a social media so that I can build. I understood the concept. I needed people, And that was the funnel, the top of the funnel. You dump people into the funnel, and eventually you'll get people that keep watching, right? They watch the long form content off the short form content. They go to the link in the description. They see your website. They look at your coaching. They look at your book, and they buy, right? And so the bottom of the funnel is the buyers.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's always been, if I wanted to build anything, I had to make the money first. And so like when I invested in my business, it was, I think it was like $2,000 in my bank account, and I said, that's gonna have to get me where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
And I've everything that you're looking at, or I'm looking at right now, my computer, my camera, my lights, all this stuff, all of this was bought and paid for by my business. I never had to invest any more than the 2,000. I created the website. I created, got the PayPal working. I got everything, kind of anything that required expense. I was strategic about how did I actually need it right away. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I had excess capital, that's when I was like, okay, I'm gonna try something here. I'm gonna throw this out, change my user experience, see if anybody likes this, and if it brings me more money, right? Like, trying different things and you know, giving people different experiences. But it was for me, it was always about, I will never allow myself to put more money in than I make for this business to be
Yep.
successful. If it doesn't make more money than I put into it, and I've only put in the 2,000. I've never put anything else in the last 3 years, and it's working for me. So it's, I'm always very conscious of this. I have to make what I have work, and I think that's a very veteran like kind of ideal that
Yep.
we share, and I think that's why a lot of veterans that step into this entrepreneurship are actually quite successful, because they're like, well, I could work with what I've got. And if you're not careful, right, the opposite can happen. Is like, I need to go get a loan, or I need to go ask people for money. Like, you just don't want to do that.
Yeah, and that's the route I've gone. I've hinged my entire business on. I mean, I originally got a loan from my parents to buy into a franchise, and I've done it that way the whole way, right? Even to this day, we utilize a line of credit. I got other loans, building loans and other loans we utilize to get where we're at today. And that's a different philosophy. And people are like, well, what should I do? I'm like, you got to figure out what your risk aversion is.
Right.
The fact that you started with $2,000 is like, okay, you went $2,000 in the deficit, and you established that was the bottom line.
Yep.
And even now, it's like, even when the numbers grow and there's more zeros at the end, you have to have a number right when you're in a clear head to say, okay, that's the line. It's kind of like I love gambling. Anyone knows me knows I love gambling. I don't care what it is. Right when I walk in the casino, if I say, hey, $500 is it, that's my spend for the night. I have $500 cash, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts.
Yep.
I might leave with $5,000. I might leave with no dollars. Right? Because $500 was the line we drew. And you have to put vehicles in place. And in the case with gambling, it's $500 cash. You bring your ID, and your hotel card. That's it. Hotel card, ID, and your $500, and you see where the night takes you. And in business, often what ends up happening, people are like, well, it's only this, it's only that. It's like, well, at what point does your quality of life suffer significantly where it wasn't worth it?
Yeah.
Right? And you get to, you as a now business owner, you get to draw that line early. So when you first started, did you start paying yourself right away?
No.
How long from March whatever 4th till I put money back into my own personal accounts and contributing to the household expenses?
Probably about 18 months. It was probably a year
Okay.
and a half or so.
Well,
And I had talked to my wife, because once we had gotten to May, right? So March to May, first 3 months of my business. May, I actually started COVID orders for the National Guard, and so I was full time. I was running a team full time for the COVID testing. and I did that for about 9 months. So I wasn't actually doing that much coaching through that first year.
Yeah.
I would do a few every once in a while, but not a whole lot. But any money that I would make, I would always reinvest it into how can I make my user experience better? How could I make my content better? Like the things that were bringing all the people to me, uh, that's what I was trying to make better. And I had these conversations with my wife, and obviously, uh, so I guess I did have a job for full time for COVID orders in 2020, but that was kind of me bringing in what I needed. And then, so I had been in business for about 18 months. That was when I was seeing significant returns that I was like, you know what? Now it's time. Let's pay ourselves. But it's such a weird moment to realize like I have all this money in this account that's just sitting there.
Yeah.
Why not give it to me? Right.
Well, so I read the book. So I'll tell people that are in business now or thinking about getting into business. I read Profit First. We implemented it this year. I went the better part of 6 years without paying myself.
Yeah.
It was a little here, a little there, and I live. I scrape by, and the challenge there is when you have those moments of why the hell am I doing this, and you look at your own personal bank account and you're like, what the hell,
Yeah.
right? And you're like, everyone else gets paid, and he talks about it in Profit First. He talks about the martyrdom syndrome, and it's difficult because you start running a business, and every dollar matters. And it's like, well, you could also start your business and put 90% of the money that comes in towards the business. The other 10% goes towards owner's equity, profit, or not owner's equity, I call it owner's pay, profit, tax account, and then you have money put aside, and it's a way. Entrepreneurship is very unpredictable. It's a way to have a level of predictability within your business. So I strongly encourage. You talk about, hey, I would have done things differently. It doesn't matter what you would have done; it's what you're going to do now. Yep. And so I encourage everybody to implement Profit First day one, because otherwise, I've seen this again. My background being in junk removal, guys, it's like they'll take 6 figures, $100,000 of saved up money or retirement or whatever, put it towards a business, and they're like, all right, I'm going to take 75 spent right away, and I'm going to use the next 25 as operating capital. And it's like 90 days later, it's like they haven't paid themselves and they're out of money.
Yeah.
It's like, well, could you have financed it, or could you have got into business, right? This is especially people that buy into franchises, which I'm very, very anti-franchise, and for a myriad of reasons. I was part of a franchise for 4 years, screwed over a ton of veterans, took their money, and I was the number one franchise in the country, so I did very well financially, but I saw a lot of people get screwed over, and I got completely out of that business. And I've seen other people veterans and civilians alike, get screwed over by other franchises. There's some great ones out there. Chick-fil-A comes to mind. Like, they're phenomenal. And the way they take care of people. Otherwise, I'm very, very anti-franchise because of, it's one of those things where you pay a lot of money to get like halfway to first base. And then you realize once you get halfway to first base, you probably could have figured it out on your own. And now you're stuck paying someone all the way home. Right. And then there's other considerations. There's other good franchises out there. If someone's got a good franchise, I'm not going to knock them. I am anti-franchise. And to your point, you never put in more than what you were willing to put in. Yeah. And when you get into franchise businesses or bigger businesses where it's beyond solopreneur, you have to know where the line is, and you establish that by saying, okay, what quality of life do I want to have? What you start with the end state in mind. How much money, or what kind of life? Not necessarily money, but what kind of life do I want to live, and how many dollars does that cost? Because we can say, "Oh, we do it for the love." I'll tell you, I love doing junk removal, but I also like knowing and love knowing that I can have nice things and do nice things. Right? Hell, we have this podcast. Right? We're able to take an hour out of our week and have this podcast. A couple of years ago, the way I ran the business, I didn't have an hour to set aside to have a podcast to talk about veterans and what we can do to support the veteran community. It wasn't, my business was running me. I wasn't running my business.
Right.
And I heard all the people when I first started like, oh, you got to, balance your time and pay yourself and all this other stuff. And I'm like, oh man, I wanted to fight it so bad. And I've tweaked it so it fits, what works for me, which is, it's alignment. And I don't have to pay myself, 6 figures. I do need to pay myself something though, because I'm worth it. I put the work in, and I also have to condition myself to pay myself. Otherwise, or because if I don't day one, I never will. Right? If you don't do it, there has to be a day one at some point. You're like, all right, this is the day I'm paying myself. And if you don't establish that date, it never happens. And the longer you wait, the more complicated it becomes because now you're accustomed to not living with that money, and your money's put aside somewhere else. So that's interesting that you went 18 months now. Yeah, I mean, circumstances, COVID, orders, whatever, testing sites, job. You still came back home and worked, 3-4 months of no income before you started collecting a paycheck.
Correct.
So my advice to everybody out there that's listening is start paying yourself right off the bat. I don't care if you're paying yourself $10,000 a year. Start with something. You can always increase the percentage. Never decrease it, but increase the percentage of your overall of the overall business income, and never go backwards. And if you and when you don't, it becomes more complicated as time goes on.
Yeah, I would agree for the most part, other than to those who might have that safety structure in place, like myself, right? Like if you, if you're trying to build a business that does require a little bit more capital than in the beginning phases, right? Like I would say, like my coaching business, it requires a little bit of capital to really get off the ground, to make sure that you've got your funnel in place, you've got your website, you've got your content down well. That sometimes that requires cameras, sometimes it requires lights, sometimes it requires the things that cost money to get. If you've got a spouse that's able to kind of take care of everything else for the time being, I don't think that's a problem, as long as you're able to communicate that and then give a hard deadline of like, we are going to pay ourselves by this time. This is my plan. And then don't scoot that plan back further and further and further, because then that communication it was useless, right? And essentially, so yeah, I think it's okay to go a little while without paying yourself, but don't make it forever, right? Like make sure that you have a hard deadline that says this much, right? Because I didn't have that, but my plan was like once I start breaking, I think my first kind of real mark was, I think, $2,000 a month. So once I broke $2,000 a month, I was going to be like, well, then I'll start determining whether I can actually pay ourselves or pay myself. And that's when I started, like, I looked at my bank account at that point and I was like, wow, that's a lot of money in there. That's when I'm like, I should actually pay myself.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too. It's interesting when you're a business owner. Like for me, it's like if I got to spend $10,000 in my business, I'm like, yeah, go ahead. Like if that's what needs to get done, whatever it is, repairs the building or buy a piece of equipment or buy a trailer or whatever. And then in my own life, I'm like, what is this? $100? Nah, I don't really need it, right? Like the value, the value of the dollar is significantly different,
right?
When you have when you have business money and personal money. Yeah. So that's it. That's just something to take a note. And the other challenge is people that have never had that type of money, myself included, all of a sudden you see those zeros and you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Like
it's a different realm.
No. So what are some misnomers, or I also want to, with respect to time here, get into some of the things you've heard from veterans that are not business owners or they became business owners. What are some, I guess, FAQs or misnomers that people have had about what it looks like?
I mean, I heard everything from like, I don't want to be married to the business to, I don't think I have it in me kind of thing. Like, I don't think I have the ability to be an entrepreneur kind of stuff. Like that's what I mostly hear. I know earlier you were talking about like the like VA loans and stuff. Like people think that there are veteran specific loans out there, like the VA home loan. I obviously never needed it, so I never looked into it. But Most of what I hear is like people just don't have confidence in themselves, or they think that building a business requires this superhuman effort.
Mm-hmm.
And I can be honest, like my whole goal with building my business was to make sure it wasn't a superhuman effort. I talk about mental health every day. And so if I'm not taking care of my mental health and also building a business around talking about mental health, I'm probably
Mm-hmm.
not doing a very good job if I'm not actually taking care of my mental health. So like my goal on a daily basis was to make sure that at the end of the day I was comfortable with who I was and who I was trying to be, and what I was offering people. Um, and so I just don't think not every business is going to be this, you're going to be required to be married to it, right? Like I could literally, you know, I mean, when my wife had the baby, my business stopped. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't married to it at all. It became a side hustle instantly because my priorities changed, and I was okay with that. Now, my clients aren't always okay with it because they are dependent upon me. So like that's when I have to have specific conversations to see who do I keep and who do I let go as clients, and who's more important to me, right? The marriage to the business to me is, am I trying to please people or am I trying to please myself? Right? That's the question
Mm.
I have to ask. Because at the end of the day, the customer may always be right, but my happiness comes first because it's my life and it's my business.
That's interesting how you say like I mean, when you are a business owner, you have that luxury to take to reprioritize as needed,
Yeah.
as necessary. And that's one of the things. It's like people often are like, oh, I can't wait to be a business owner because then I can be in charge and all a more free schedule. I'm like, no, no,
Mm.
like yes, at times that happens.
Right.
It takes years typically, right?
Yeah.
It is right atypical to think, oh yeah, 6 months of hard work and the next 5 years I'm on easy street. Like
That's not how it works.
that ain't how it works, right? And then to your point, like you were very intentional.
Yeah.
You answered a non-rhetorical question, which is what's more important, my baby
Yep.
or my business, right? I know I was doing a podcast. I have another podcast, the Trash Talk Business Podcast, with my buddy Casey. We talk about the junk rule industry, and his son came in the room towards the end of the podcast because he recently moved out of his commercial space because, well, they're married reasons, and he's back working at home. And it's like, well, that's his priority, right? We do the podcast on Mondays because Tuesdays, Thursdays, he doesn't work. Tuesdays, Thursday, he's daddy daycare
Yep.
because those are the 2 days that his wife works, and they're both business owners. So she does her work Tuesday, Thursday, so he's at home with his kids, and he loves it.
Yep.
And he's the first 2 years, his son, 2, 3, first 3 years after his son was born, he was working full time and he barely saw his son,
Yeah.
and that was no longer a priority. Now, he worked really hard for 6 years to make a good exit on his business, so now he's earned the opportunity to work 3 days a week. But it took 6 years and a wife that had done very well for herself in her business. So it reminds me of people, especially soldiers, E4s, right? They make sergeant and they think, oh, now I get to sit in the back room and bullshit and not have to do anything.
Yep.
It's like, no, the work began. Like,
Right.
yeah, are there some, does rank have some privilege? Absolutely. And it doesn't come with the work, or it comes, it doesn't come with the rank, it comes with the work.
Yep.
But you got to put the work in. And unlike, the civilian world where there's more, or even the military to that matter, there's a pretty clear and concise, you do this is the result structure. When it comes to the entrepreneurship, you can do everything quote unquote right, by the book, the way it's supposed to be, and the results don't come.
Yeah.
And that's business.
Right.
And so that's where I think that is where veterans do struggle, is they're so used to a level of predictability, and entrepreneurship is the
Not
least
that.
predictable thing out there.
Yeah. So what about your beginnings in terms of like unpredictability, and what did you struggle with in terms of what you thought was going to happen and then what happened?
I didn't really think that was. I mean, we grew so much faster and farther than I thought. I mean, my goal was like, man, wouldn't it be cool if we ran a junk removal company where we did $10,000 a month? Like that would be awesome. We did $13,000 our first month, and then we did 16,000 our second month, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And our third month we did 29,000, and I was like, oh shit, I don't know what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I just like it was just it was like one foot in front of the other. It was like basic training, and you didn't look at the training schedule, right? You're just like, I don't know what we're doing next, and you just figure it out, right? Like I remember in basic we did the 3K, the first ruck march, the 3K. I came back and my shins were screaming, and my knees hurt, and my back hurt, and I was just a big ball of fuck. And then whatever, I think we did a 5K or then a 7K and then a 10K. Man, by the time we got to that 10K, I'm like, dude, sign me up for another 10. Let's go. And then we did a 15K that turned into 20 or 21 because we had a reserve drill sergeant that took us down the wrong path. I don't know. We were rucking for a long ass time, right? So if the 3K was an hour, this was like 6 hours, 7 hours, whatever it was. And I remember the 3K was more difficult than any of the other ones because I didn't know where to put the weight on my pack. I didn't know how to step. I didn't know how to paw. I didn't know how to do anything. And that's how it turned out with junk removal. It's like those first couple months were beyond a struggle and difficult and rough because I didn't even know what I was doing. It's like, well, once you exercise those muscles, you're like, oh, I got this.
Yeah.
And then it was, I mean, just constant figure out the next thing. You know, we didn't know what to say no to because everything was a yes. And you're like, oh, yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. And so then we learned a lot along the way.
Right.
It was 2 or 3 years in before we're like, oh, we should say no to that. Like, that didn't work out well. That was we didn't get hurt, and there was a lot of luck involved to get us not hurt.
Yeah.
So, you know, my personality type, the PI index, I'm a maverick. I talk before I think, and I act similarly as quick. So in that regard, it wasn't that things didn't go my way. It was, I had to figure it out. I will say though, the one thing, because I graduated college at the same time I started my business. So I had to come, and right before that I was deployed. So it was like I had this more mindset of, okay, do this, get that. I do know very early in business I was into there should be grants for veterans. And, once I'm a veteran-owned business, like, things are going to come my way, and I'm going to, become service, or I hadn't applied for disability yet, so I couldn't be service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. But I was like, I'm going to be a, veteran-owned business and register on all these sites, and I'm going to get all these jobs. I can tell you that didn't mean shit. I went to all the seminars. I paid the money. I had a lady that wrote grants for me because we were doing environmentally sound, solutions and all this other stuff. And I can tell you what it all came down to was you had to go out there and work.
Yeah.
And I've also met veterans, and I'm part of a group here in Wisconsin that's it's designated for veteran, women, and minority-owned small businesses. And often when you go to these seminars, it's like, you deserve this because you served, or you deserve this because you're a woman or because you're a minority. And a lot of people feed into that shit. And it's like, man, that's a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter what you deserve. What matters is who's going to pay you to do the thing because you put the work in. I had that. Yeah, I had that
in real life.
Right? Correct. I had this quasi-victim mindset. Like, they should hire me because I'm a veteran. No, they should hire me because I'm the best at what I do. And my product or service lines up with their need. Yeah. And I got over that quick, fast, in a hurry because I realized that, okay, being a veteran is good. I'm good. I put it on my website, and then so what? Yep. Right? Like, you still have to go out there and provide a really good customer experience. And that's one of those misnomers that people let us down the path. Like, kind of like when we had the gentleman on here that he wrote the book From CO to CEO. He's like, take everything they taught you in TAPS and never think about it again. Yeah. And it's like, the problem I had was I went to the SBA. I went to this other organization in Milwaukee that like writes grants. I went to the chambers, and they had all these great ideas. And I'm like, well, hold on. None of you guys run a for-profit business. And then I started asking for-profit business owners the reality of shit, and they told me the actual reality of stuff, right? It's like, the SBA is like, well, this is available and this is available. I'm like, well, is there dollars assigned to this thing? Like, you're not going to give me free money. Well, there's these grants, and you could apply and you might get the money. It's like, well, might get the money, or I can go perform my craft. It's kind of like with you. It's like you could go out there and get every certification out there and get registered with every agency to be a mental health coach, counselor, therapist, whatever. It's like, or you could tell people on TikTok that this is what I do and you can pay me if you'd like individual time.
Yeah.
Like, and those are two very different paths.
Right.
And I would argue from a for-profit, reduce the amount of steps and time is put out there the product or service that you want to sell today, see how the market responds, and adjust fire as needed.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't but 5 years into business where I got paid to be an environmental consultant. Yep. I said I was an environmental consultant for 5 or 6 years before someone paid me to actually consult.
Right.
It's like I didn't wait 5-6 years and tell people. No, I went and banged a shitload of jobs and figured out what is the solid waste industry all about. And now I'm at a point in that industry where I'm a paid individual. I get paid to go to conferences. I get paid to speak. I get paid to do public appearances. Like, well, 7 years ago, that wasn't even on my radar of things. I just said, I'm going to go do this thing. And one foot in front of the other. So that's my advice to veterans that want to get in entrepreneurship. You have to know the 3 basic things, right? And from there, you'll narrow it down in time. Don't get this paralysis by analysis thinking you got to have this 50-page business plan. I did that. I had the 50-page business plan, and it was cool. I learned a lot in the journey of writing the business plan, and then I put it in a file, and I didn't look at it for years because I had to go out there and run the play over and over and over.
Right.
And even now when people say, hey, why were you successful? I'm not like, hey, let me go look at my business plan and see what I said 7 years ago and how it worked out. No, I'm like, well, you know what? Let me tell you what happened last week. Right? And let me tell you some of these big events. So to veterans out there that want to become an entrepreneur, the stats say you're more likely. The stats say we need you to build businesses, right? 2 million businesses, 5 million employees, right? And the stats also say you got to figure it out. Because once you come back to the civilian world here, you will get chewed up and spit out. Yeah. And I mean in the nicest way possible, because veterans often hear all this gobbledygook that sounds great, and it's terrible in practice. Mm-hmm. There's my takeaway from today. What's your takeaway? In other words, getting the ball rolling.
I mean, just the experience, right? Like I have my experience, you have your experience, and they're so very similar, right? Because we're just, once you become a business owner, you're just a firefighter, right? Yep. You just have to find the next problem and work the problem. You know, like I love the movie The Martian. Where he's just constantly like, I got to work the problem, right? What's the next problem to solve? That'll always be my biggest takeaway when we talk about business, because that's what you have to do, and you have to make sure those problems are more profitable than they are expensive. And that's when you become a good business owner is like make more profit than you have a bunch of problems that are really expensive and you're not making any profits. Well, guess what? You're going to be in the red, and that's no good.
Yeah. Investing money in your business and in assets is a good thing. It means that you have money to invest.
Yep.
Right? Or pay taxes. Those are your options. Invest or pay taxes. Those are your choices. All right, Dylan, it's been a pleasure. I love everything about what we're doing here in the podcast. I'm enjoying the journey so far, and I'm excited to continue to have conversations with you and others. And I encourage people that are listening to podcasts, find us on the interwebs. Taylor, our producer, will put the links in. Apply to be a speaker. We want to hear about your journey and how the information that you learned along the way can support other veterans and veteran family members that want to live the life they want to live without having to go through the same struggles that we've gone through. So, another great episode on behalf of Dylan. I'm Andy. Welcome home.